What about the egg, huh?
I am the egg.
Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to the Smiling Frame channel. Please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a thumbs up. Today, we are going to be discussing the movie The Expendables 3 from 2014. The relentless pursuit of justice, or perhaps just the lucrative business of high-stakes muscle for hire, finds the aging but still formidable Expendables facing a terrifying new reality. The opening salvo sees Barney Ross, ever the composed field general, leading his crew. Lee Christmas, the master of blades with a surprising depth of emotion beneath the tough exterior, and Gunnar Jensen, whose past demons often threaten to derail missions, now thankfully anchored, on a raid in Somalia. They intercept a heavily armed convoy, demonstrating their familiar, if slightly slower, synergy. The target isn't just weapons. It's a notorious international arms dealer, Conrad Stonebanks, a figure who casts a long, dark shadow over Barney's history. The confrontation with Stonebanks, however, takes a shocking turn. Stonebanks, revealed not to be some washed-up mercenary, but a cunning, well-funded opponent, easily outmaneuvers them, leaving several Expendables severely wounded, and Barney himself clinging to life. This near-fatal encounter serves as a stark reminder that the game has evolved, and perhaps their analog methods are no longer sufficient against modern threats armed with superior resources. Back in the States, a recovering Barney, guided by the practical wisdom of CIA operative Max Drummer, realizes the mission cannot proceed with their current structure. Drummer subtly pushes Barney toward a difficult decision: retirement for the older guard. Barney, unwilling to sacrifice his friends but recognizing their vulnerability, takes the painful step of sidelining the original team. He sets out to recruit new blood, aiming for younger, faster, and perhaps more expendable operatives. A concept that initially feels alien to the brotherhood he has built, echoing the sense of duty that fueled Arnold Schwarzenegger's early action roles, now filtered through a lens of necessary pragmatism. The search leads Barney to Las Vegas, and then to various corners of the globe, gathering a crew whose profiles read like a who's who of burgeoning action cinema talent. There's the eager, skilled newcomer, John Jonah Jameson III, a wise-cracking explosives expert whose youthful enthusiasm contrasts sharply with the grizzled veterans. There's also the martial arts dynamo, Diesel Washington, whose fluid fighting style recalls the high-kicking choreography of his cinematic inspirations. This new generation, brimming with energy and digital know-how, represents the future, a necessary infusion of youth to face Stonebanks, who, it turns out, has ties to the very intelligence community Barney once served. The final confrontation is set in Bucharest, where Stonebanks has established a massive fortress, intent on flooding the global black market with weapons. The older team, unable to sit idly by, secretly reunites, driven by the fierce loyalty that defines their careers, the kind of loyalty often seen in classic war films where the bonds forged in battle prove stronger than any official mandate. Lee Christmas, never far from a sharp edge, is visibly energized by the prospect of settling the score personally. The combined force of the seasoned veterans and the fresh recruits launches a two-pronged assault. The younger team handles the initial infiltration, showcasing their agility and technological proficiency, disabling perimeter defenses and causing significant chaos within the enemy ranks. Meanwhile, Barney, Sylvester Stallone's enduring archetype of the grizzled warrior, alongside his core team, breaches the main compound. The ensuing battle is a chaotic ballet of gunfire, expertly thrown knives, and well-placed explosions, reminiscent of the best practical effects-driven action sequences. The climax focuses squarely on Barney and Stonebanks. Their history, a partnership that soured into betrayal, provides the emotional weight to the physical fight. Stonebanks, arrogant in his belief of technological superiority, is ultimately outmaneuvered by Barney's street smarts and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. Stonebanks is defeated not just by a bullet, but by the cumulative weight of his own greed and betrayal, a classic trope where pure, principled force triumphs over corrupt ambition. With Stonebanks neutralized and the threat averted, the film concludes with a satisfying sense of closure. The two generations of Expendables stand together, having proven that while methods change, the core values of dedication and brotherhood remain the essential components of survival, leading to a final, earned moment of camaraderie, and perhaps a hint that the next generation is ready to take the reins when the call comes again. The initial ambush in Somalia, designed to be a swift extraction and neutralization, quickly devolved into a demonstration of Stonebanks' chilling foresight. When Barney Ross, whose screen presence has always been defined by that quiet, unwavering command, felt the impact that nearly ended him, it wasn't just a physical wound. It was a deep psychological blow to the man who built his reputation on reading and controlling the battlefield. Watching his foundational team, like Lee Christmas, whose dedication to his throwing knives borders on performance art, struggle against overwhelming, unseen firepower, truly shook the foundation. Christmas, whose earlier roles often involved proving his worth in the shadow of bigger personalities, clearly carried the burden of nearly failing his leader. Barney's forced hiatus brought forth a necessary but painful introspection. His decision to sideline the originals, Gunnar Jensen, whose redemption arc has always been about channeling his explosive temper into precision, and the others, was not born of cowardice, but of a devastating understanding of operational reality. He recognized that their familiar rhythm, the one that defined their legendary successes in countless past missions, was now outpaced. This act mirrors the necessary succession seen in classic adventure narratives, where the old mentor must step back to ensure the legacy survives, even if the process feels like self-amputation. The recruitment phase, particularly in Las Vegas, offered a vibrant contrast. John Jonah Jameson III, with his sharp wit and mastery over explosives, a nod to the practical demolition skills often highlighted in Stallone's earlier portrayals of lone operators, brought an almost reckless energy. He was the embodiment of digital age capability, meeting old-school bravado. Denzel Washington, whose fighting style suggested a deep, almost academic study of various martial disciplines, represented the specialized physical expertise modern threats demanded. They weren't just filling slots, they were injecting a necessary evolutionary spark into the stagnant formula. When the older guard, fueled by stubborn pride and the unbreakable pact of their shared history, decided to defy Barney's orders and join the final push, the emotional resonance was palpable. It was the ultimate declaration that their identity was not defined by a paycheck or a mission brief, but by their commitment to each other. This is where the heart of the Expendables truly lies, in the shared, almost familial defiance against isolation, much like the sense of brotherhood celebrated in films about soldiers behind enemy lines. The final assault on Stonebank's Romanian stronghold was a masterclass in layered strategy. The younger team served as the perfect disruptive element, utilizing speed and technological sophistication to chew through the outer defenses, mirroring the precision strikes demanded in contemporary counter-terrorism cinema. Then came the main event. Barney, leading his battered but resolute veterans, Lee Christmas, whose blades found their mark with brutal efficiency, and the others, to the core. The confrontation with Stonebanks was intensely personal. Stonebanks, the mirror image of what Barney could have become had he succumbed to pure avarice, represented the failure of trust. The physical struggle between them was less a fight between two soldiers, and more the necessary exorcism of a shared, corrupted past. When Barney finally prevailed, it wasn't just a tactical victory. It was the triumph of hard-earned experience and enduring loyalty over cold, calculated betrayal. The final scene, with the integration of the two generations, suggested a future where the grit of the past is successfully married to the agility of the present, ensuring the legend, however dangerous, will continue. The near-fatal encounter in Somalia was not merely a tactical failure. It exposed a vulnerability. Barney Ross, whose entire career was built on anticipating every enemy move, had perhaps ignored the erosion of time and the hyper-modernization of warfare. When Stonebanks effortlessly turned the tables, the shock radiated through the team. Lee Christmas, whose meticulous focus on his bladed weapons often masked a deep emotional sensitivity, likely felt the sting of incompetence keenly, that familiar pressure to be the perfect support asset when the primary structure crumbled. Gunnar Jensen, whose journey has always been about maintaining a fragile peace with his own destructive tendencies, would have seen in Stonebanks the ultimate chaos he struggles to contain within himself, making the defeat feel existential. Barney's subsequent move to sideline his original crew was portrayed with the heavy weight of a leader forced to choose the lesser of two devastating outcomes. It was a heartbreaking necessity, a narrative echo of older action heroes having to pass the torch or watch their legacy burn. His recruitment drive felt less like assembling a squad and more like an urgent archaeological dig for compatible firepower. John Jonah Jameson III, the new demolitions expert, crackled with the kind of untamed enthusiasm that action cinema loves to harness, a raw energy that could either save the day or blow up the wrong building, a direct contrast to the measured destruction of the veterans. Denzel Washington brought an almost balletic lethality, representing the highly specialized physical prowess that Barney recognized his older, perhaps stiffer team could no longer consistently deliver. The decision by the old guard to ignore Barney's protective orders and re-engage was the emotional anchor of the entire narrative. It was a declaration that their bond superseded any official directive or even Barney's own judgment. For men like Hail Caesar, whose imposing presence and unwavering loyalty have defined his contributions, abandoning the mission was never an option when brotherhood was on the line. Their unauthorized return was less an act of insubordination and more a visceral reaffirmation of the implicit contract they signed decades ago. The final confrontation was thus not just about eliminating a terrorist financier, it was about reconciling the past. Stonebanks wasn't just a target. He was the dark reflection of Barney's own potential for ruthlessness when unguided by loyalty. The ensuing battle, particularly the face-off between Barney and Stonebanks, was staged to emphasize Stonebanks' reliance on technology and overwhelming resources versus Barney's fundamental, almost primal, understanding of combat mechanics, the way he moved, the economy of his actions, which draws directly from Stallone's commitment to grounded, often painful-looking physicality. When Stonebanks finally fell, the victory felt hard-won, not just in terms of bullets dodged, but in the emotional toll extracted by confronting a ghost from their shared past. The integration of the new and old guard at the end wasn't just a celebratory montage. It was the visual confirmation that the spirit of the mercenary, when guided by a strong moral center, is indeed immortal, capable of adapting its vessel without losing its core essence. The young men learned pragmatism. The old men remembered their vitality. The aftermath of the Stonebanks operation settled into a period of uneasy reconstruction, the lingering scent of cordite mixing with the quiet acknowledgments of necessity. Barney Ross surveying the assembled group, the younger, eager faces mingling with the weathered visages of his original crew, felt the familiar, complex burden of leadership settle back onto his shoulders. The near disaster had forged a new, albeit slightly uneasy synthesis between the generations. The younger operatives, having tasted genuine high-stakes combat outside of simulations, possessed a newfound respect for the sheer grit the veterans embodied. John Jonah Jameson III, for instance, no longer threw his witty remarks out with the same casual abandon, having seen how quickly arrogance can be corrected by a well-placed enemy soldier. Lee Christmas, always the one to internalize stress through meticulous preparation, was observed spending hours sharpening his blades, the rhythmic metallic whisper becoming a meditation, a way to process the close call. He understood implicitly that the new blood brought necessary speed, but that speed alone couldn't replace the decades of accumulated instinct that had saved Barney's life when all else failed. It was Christmas who often served as the bridge, translating the veterans' ingrained tactical lexicon into terms the younger team could immediately grasp, recognizing that proficiency in modern warfare required both the speed of the digital age and the tangible, brutal effectiveness of hand-to-hand expertise. Gunnar Jensen surprisingly seemed more grounded. Having faced down a ghost from his mentor's past, he seemed less haunted by his own demons, channeling his explosive capability into disciplined support roles. There was a quiet understanding between him and the new team's specialists. They provided the data, but the veterans provided the necessary, often violent context. The conclusion of the Stonebanks affair didn't signal a relaxing of operations. Rather, it seemed to signal a higher level of scrutiny from unseen forces. The clean sweep of Stonebanks' network attracted attention, the kind of high-level governmental curiosity that often precedes the next impossible assignment. Barney sensed that the successful integration of the two teams had not gone unnoticed by the shadowy patrons of global security, the very entities who often relied on men like the Expendables precisely because they operated outside the tedious constraints of official protocol. The quiet confidence emanating from the combined unit suggested they were ready, not just to take the next job, but perhaps to finally define the terms under which they would take it, a subtle shift in power dynamics built on their recent, costly victory. The world, it seemed, would soon call upon them again, likely requiring a fusion of old-school brutality and new-age precision. The uneasy peace following the Bucharest engagement soon fractured under the weight of a new global instability, signaling that the successful purge of Stonebanks had merely cleared the board for a more intricate game. Barney Ross, ever the barometer for escalating danger, found the usual channels of lucrative but morally gray missions drying up, replaced instead by cryptic messages suggesting a threat originating from within the established order, a betrayal far more insidious than Stonebanks's mercenary ambition. This new adversary seemed to possess an institutional reach, manipulating events from behind layers of political and military obfuscation. The subtle tension between the old and new guard began to manifest in professional disagreements rather than outright conflict. The younger members, particularly John Jonah Jameson III, whose reliance on real-time surveillance data bordered on obsession, clashed gently with the veterans' reliance on gut feeling. Lee Christmas, observing these exchanges, often interjected with a dry observation about how quickly technology fails when the power grid goes down, subtly reminding the newcomers that the most reliable tools were still those that required muscle and a sharp edge. Christmas, having proven his loyalty and skill once again, carried himself with a newfound quiet authority. He was no longer just the supporting knife thrower, but the indispensable anchor of practical execution. The introduction of the next threat involved a former intelligence asset, a man named Silven, who had gone rogue after witnessing atrocities committed by his own government handlers, a narrative paralleling the disillusionment that often fueled characters in classic espionage thrillers, where the line between hero and villain blurs. Silven wasn't interested in profit. He sought exposure, holding critical data that could dismantle established global security structures. The objective, handed down through shadowy intermediaries, was not to eliminate Silven, but to extract him alive before he could upload his damning information, a mission inherently fraught with the moral ambiguity the Expendables usually tried to avoid. For Barney, this mission felt like a return to the kind of high-stakes political tightrope walking that had characterized the more dangerous, unofficial missions of his past, long before the formation of the Expendables. He recognized the weight of responsibility in extracting a man who claimed to be a whistleblower. It demanded a level of surgical precision that stretched the capabilities of even the newly integrated team. Gunnar Jensen, whose own past involved institutional betrayal, seemed particularly invested in the complexity of Silven's motives, viewing the mission as an opportunity for a different kind of redemption, saving a man attempting to bring truth to light rather than merely eliminating a paid threat. The blending of raw power with nuanced extraction strategy was now the defining characteristic of this evolving team. The extraction of Silven presented an immediate, chilling contrast to the previous, straightforward kinetic engagement against Stonebanks. This time, the opposition wasn't just heavily armed mercenaries. They were professional counterintelligence units operating with the cold, systemic efficiency that Barney Ross had always sought to avoid when forming his own band of outlaws. The mission parameters shifted from annihilation to finesse, a concept that initially made the younger recruits restless. Barney assigned the infiltration lead to Denzel Washington, valuing his fluid movement and ability to navigate complex, confined spaces without creating unnecessary collateral damage, a nod to the precision required in espionage thrillers, where subtlety is prized over brute force. Washington's quiet confidence suggested he understood the stakes were higher than simple firepower. This was about tactical silence. Meanwhile, the veterans, including Hail Caesar, whose enduring physical presence was a reassuring constant, were tasked with creating the necessary diversionary chaos once the extraction point was breached, ensuring that any pursuit would be bogged down by familiar, reliable explosions and firepower. The retrieval itself was tense. Silven, clearly paranoid and operating on raw adrenaline, was not an easy asset to secure. John Jonah, Jameson III, found himself under immense pressure, his usual quick wit failing him as he had to manage the delicate electronic countermeasures needed to shield the team from surveillance tracking, a task where one miscalculated key press could alert the entire sector. It was Lee Christmas who truly shone in the immediacy of the extraction. When the initial contact team closed in, Christmas transitioned seamlessly from cover support to close-quarters combat, his knives moving in blinding arcs that neutralized threats without excessive noise, a perfect demonstration of maximum effect with minimum signature. He executed the move with an economy of motion that spoke volumes about his commitment to protecting the objective, embodying the professional focus honed over decades. During the tense exfiltration, Silven, while initially guarded, began to speak, revealing not just data, but a profound weariness that mirrored the silent existential exhaustion Barney sometimes carried. He spoke of being used as a pawn by forces far too powerful and too entrenched to be fought with just guns and bravado. This conversation deeply resonated with the older Expendables, reminding them of the sacrifices made by countless unsung operatives throughout their careers, men who chose integrity over comfort, only to be discarded. The mission was successful, but the cost was measured in heightened paranoia rather than physical injuries. Bringing Silven back to a clandestine location felt less like a victory and more like inheriting a very volatile bomb. The data Silven possessed was so corrosive to established power that Barney knew their shadowy employers were not allies, but merely temporary custodians of a threat they couldn't handle internally. The team, now truly unified by the shared experience of navigating moral gray zones, understood that their next challenge wouldn't be about eliminating a bad guy, but about deciding which side of the coming storm they truly belonged on, a decision heavy with the implication that they might soon find themselves fighting the very people who hired them. The fragile alliance forged during the Silven extraction quickly reached its breaking point as the true nature of their employer's intentions became agonizingly clear. Silven's data wasn't merely damaging. It implicated key figures in international security apparatuses, the very entities who occasionally subcontracted operations to disposable assets like the Expendables. Barney Ross, reviewing the encrypted files alongside the increasingly concerned veterans, recognized the familiar stench of a cover-up escalating into a systemic purge. The supposed mandate to secure Silven alive morphed, via coded messages from their handlers, into a directive to eliminate the asset and erase all evidence, essentially turning the Expendables into cleanup crew for deep state malpractice. This crossed a fundamental line that even the morally flexible mercenaries were unwilling to traverse. For Barney, whose entire ethos is built around protecting his team and occasionally, selectively, upholding a tarnished version of justice, complicity in silencing a whistleblower was an unforgivable extension of the corruption Stonebanks represented. This realization solidified the necessity of breaking entirely from their contractual obligations. Lee Christmas, predictably, was the first to voice the necessary defiance with brutal clarity, stating that he'd rather fight the people who paid them than participate in another bureaucratic execution. His dedication to tangible, definable threats made the nebulous, abstract evil of institutional corruption personally offensive. Gunnar Jensen, ever the explosives expert, offered a practical solution. They needed to go dark, disappear from the digital grid their new enemies monitored so closely, an act requiring the meticulous planning of a full operational blackout. The decision to protect Silven, effectively turning them into fugitives, brought a strange sense of liberation to the veterans. It echoed the early defiant missions of their careers, reminiscent of classic action narratives where the heroes must fight their way out of an unjust system. The younger members, initially hesitant about challenging powerful governmental structures, were swayed by the palpable sense of integrity radiating from Barney's command. John Jonah Jameson III, seeing the true stakes beyond mere contracts, began using his technical skills not for infiltration support, but for counter-surveillance, turning his digital expertise against his former employer's tracking systems with an almost patriotic fervor. The subsequent phase involved a desperate scramble for resources and secure relocation, leading them to a remote, heavily fortified location. A fortress built not against external terrorists, but against internal betrayal. This defensive posturing, necessary for survival, signaled the Expendables' final transformation. They were no longer merely mercenaries for hire, but a self-governing, highly lethal entity capable of resisting global powers. They understood that the next engagement would be fought not for money or accolades, but for their very existence, against an enemy possessing limitless resources and the authority to command silence. The stage was set for a war where the definition of expendable had suddenly been reversed. The decision to defy their powerful handlers transformed the Expendables overnight from highly paid contractors into the world's most wanted fugitives, a status that strangely invigorated the older guard. Barney Ross felt the familiar weight of responsibility, mixed with a dangerous thrill. He was back in the gray, operating outside all official sanction, a role he always performed best. He relied heavily on Silven's intelligence, turning the insider's knowledge of systemic vulnerabilities into the team's shield and sword. Silven, now under the protective watch of Denzel Washington, whose quiet efficiency proved invaluable in guarding a high-value, high-risk asset, started to shed his paranoia, recognizing that these men, though violent, adhered to a code far stricter than the bureaucrats they were fighting. The transition required a full commitment from the new recruits. John Jonah Jameson III, thrilled by the ultimate cybersecurity challenge, went into overdrive, creating digital smokescreens and setting up encrypted communication webs that would have been impossible a few months prior. His youthful arrogance was tempered by the serious consequences of failure. One slip, and they would all be vaporized by assets with jurisdiction across continents. He learned quickly that the true mastery of technology was knowing when to turn it off entirely. Lee Christmas found himself in his element, organizing the physical security of their hidden base. He viewed the impending confrontation not just as a fight, but as a highly complicated demolition project. He lectured the younger team on the necessity of redundant physical defenses, emphasizing that no firewall was as reliable as a well-placed C4 charge or a perfectly thrown knife, closing the gap when electronics failed. His intensity during these preparations seemed to channel the disciplined focus often seen in elite military units preparing for a protracted siege. The veterans, understanding they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned by state-level resources, focused on asymmetrical warfare. They weren't going to win a straight firefight. They had to use precision strikes and leverage the element of surprise, which was becoming harder as their adversaries closed in. Gunnar Jensen took charge of creating traps and early warning systems around their perimeter, his past battles with inner turmoil lending him a grim focus on external threat containment. He seemed to understand that survival depended on turning their defensive position into an inescapable meat grinder for anyone who dared breach their sanctuary. The final, inevitable clash was characterized by a desperate, coordinated defense. When the assault came, precise, overwhelming, and clearly orchestrated by former colleagues or subordinates of Barney's, it was a showcase of perfect synergy. The younger team utilized speed and technological disruption to neutralize drones and incoming surveillance, while the veterans held the line, using their accumulated knowledge of combat doctrine to anticipate every conventional maneuver. The emotional core remained. This was not about money or contracts. It was about defending the self-made family against the very system that once tried to define them. The fight was brutal, a testament to the fact that true loyalty, once earned, is the most dangerous weapon in the world. The culmination of their defense against the concerted assault by their former employers marked a definitive turning point for the Expendables. It was no longer about completing assignments. It was about carving out a space where their version of professional ethics could survive. A truly sovereign entity in a world dominated by compromised authority. Barney Ross, positioned at the nerve center of their makeshift fortress, directed the flow of battle with the grim satisfaction of a man finally fighting for the right principles, even if those principles had to be enforced with overwhelming firepower. His leadership during this crisis cemented his status not just as a field commander, but as the philosophical leader of this new mercenary cohort. The younger members proved their mettle beyond any initial expectations. John Jonah Jameson III managed to completely sever external communication lines during the height of the attack, essentially blinding their technically superior foes, demonstrating that digital mastery, when applied with conviction, could overcome brute force. This act earned him a rare, approving nod from Lee Christmas, who himself was locked in a brutal, close-quarters engagement near the main ingress point. Christmas fought with a savage elegance, his knives moving too fast for the eye to follow, each throw an absolute commitment to ending the threat instantly, proving that ancient skill remains superior to modern hardware when it comes to decisive personal combat. The veterans, meanwhile, operated with the terrifying predictability of seasoned predators. Hail Caesar's steadfast presence, anchoring the main defensive line, provided the necessary stability, allowing the others to execute complex maneuvers. Gunnar Jensen's defensive traps proved devastatingly effective, turning the well-planned approach of the enemy forces into a series of catastrophic explosions that reflected the chaotic energy Gunnar himself had spent a lifetime trying to control. The final act of defiance involved Silven. Realizing the only way to truly secure their freedom was to expose the corruption that motivated the attack, Silven, with the guarded cooperation of Denzel Washington providing cover, managed to broadcast a heavily encrypted portion of the incriminating data onto a secure global network before the final wave of attackers could silence him permanently. It was a necessary sacrifice, an exchange of one life for the potential liberation of the truth. As the smoke cleared and the remnants of the attacking force retreated, the cost was apparent. They had won the battle for survival, but they had made countless permanent, powerful enemies. Yet, looking around at the unified team, the veterans standing shoulder to shoulder with the younger operatives, all sharing the exhaustion and the hard-won victory, Barney realized the mission had been successful in an entirely unforeseen way. They had not just recruited new muscle. They had built a genuine, self-sustaining brotherhood capable of challenging the world's shadows. They were now truly independent, forever on the run, but finally fighting on their own terms, an enduring testament to the action hero's ability to reinvent himself and his team against impossible odds. The silence that followed the final wave of retreat was heavy, thick with the metallic tang of expended ammunition and the adrenaline crash. The victory over their former handlers felt less like a triumph and more like the breaking of a dam. The floodgates of official scrutiny were now wide open, but the Expendables, fortified by their defiance, were ready to stand against the torrent. Barney Ross surveyed the damage, not just to the physical structure of their sanctuary, but to the emotional landscape of his team. Silven's sacrifice, the necessary detonation of truth against the powerful machine, was a haunting reminder that their path to freedom would be paved with further losses and sacrifices. Lee Christmas, meticulously cleaning the residue from his favorite pair of throwing knives, was unusually quiet, his usual sharp banter replaced by a focused intensity. He understood that the fight against institutional power was far less satisfying than confronting a known mercenary. There were no clean kills here, only the lingering residue of moral compromise, even on the side of righteousness. His silent dedication to maintaining his edge was his way of processing the gravity of their new reality, a reality where every piece of equipment had to be flawless, because there would be no backup call. For the younger guard, the baptism by fire was complete. John Jonah Jameson III, having successfully executed complex digital warfare against overwhelming odds, now possessed a hardened edge beneath his quick wit. He recognized that data was a weapon, but conviction, the kind that made Barney Ross choose exile over complicity, was the ultimate firewall. He seemed to appreciate, with newfound sobriety, the lessons imparted by Gunnar Jensen on the critical difference between simulation and visceral, life-or-death decision-making under duress. Jensen, having masterfully orchestrated defensive traps that crippled the enemy's advance, finally seemed at peace. His mastery over destructive forces was now channeled into protection, a tangible sign of his ongoing redemption. The team understood they could not remain static. The broadcast of Silven's information, while a critical blow to their adversaries, was also a global declaration of war against them. They were now the ultimate loose ends. Barney knew their next move required not just tactical brilliance, but strategic invisibility. They needed to disappear into the fringes of the world, leveraging the very shadows they once operated within, but this time operating entirely for themselves. The blend of the veterans' old-school, analog resilience and the new team's digital sophistication offered a blueprint for survival. They were a self-contained fighting force, a ghost army operating outside the geopolitical chessboard. The adventure wasn't over. It had simply escalated from a mercenary contract to a crusade for self-preservation, promising an enduring saga where every future mission would be existential. The immediate aftermath demanded a level of operational secrecy they had rarely needed before. Barney Ross, keenly aware that their every digital footprint was now being meticulously tracked by vengeful, well-resourced intelligence agencies, ordered a complete system scrub. This was a throwback to the days before widespread digital tracking, relying on the veterans' expertise in analog concealment. Hail Caesar, whose steadfast reliability made him the natural choice for securing physical assets, oversaw the meticulous destruction of all traceable equipment, a necessary mournful ritual that signaled the end of one operational phase and the terrifying beginning of the next. Denzel Washington became the guardian of the team's new mobility, utilizing his knowledge of obscure global travel networks to secure untraceable routes away from their compromised sanctuary. He worked in tandem with the younger operatives, teaching them the subtle art of blending into anonymous populations, a skill far removed from the flashy infiltrations they had perfected. This necessity of erasure forced an intimacy between the two generations. The younger members learned humility, realizing that technical prowess was useless if one couldn't secure a clean passage across a border without a passport. Lee Christmas, driven by a deeper sense of protective duty after Silven's sacrifice, took personal charge of hardening the team's internal security protocols, focusing on reinforcing the human element. He constantly drilled the newer members on knife drills and unarmed combat, insisting that true reliance must always be placed on the skills that cannot be jammed or remotely disabled. His insistence was almost paternal, a recognition that in the coming fight, personal, visceral lethality would be the ultimate differentiator against faceless, technologically superior opponents. Barney himself wrestled with the ethical implications of their forced isolation. They had saved a man who exposed wrongdoing, yet in doing so, they had become enemies of the state, the very definition of the term they once mocked. This moral ambiguity, a theme running through the careers of action icons who often portrayed vigilantes outside the law, now defined their existence. He looked at his crew, realizing that the success of their escape would depend not on any single firefight, but on their ability to maintain this fragile, self-imposed isolation. The next challenge would not be a fortress to assault, but the entire global net designed to ensnare them, a far more daunting and personal war. The strategic dissolution of their known infrastructure, the systematic erasure of safe houses and digital ghosts, was executed with a chilling efficiency that spoke volumes about the veterans' accumulated experience in disappearing acts. Barney demanded perfection. Every piece of hardware that could betray their location was either physically destroyed or wiped clean with specialized EMP charges designed by Gunnar Jensen. Jensen, finding a grim catharsis in weaponizing chaos against his former shadowy employers, treated the process like a purifying ritual, channeling his inherent volatility into calculated, disciplined deconstruction. He no longer fought his own demons. He harnessed them to secure the perimeter of their continued existence. The forced migration led them into the deep anonymity of the South American interiors, a territory hostile to satellites and conventional surveillance, a true analog refuge. Here the generational divide narrowed not through shared combat, but through shared hardship. Denzel Washington, fluent in navigating the complex social and geographical mazes of these hidden regions, became their indispensable guide. He taught John Jonah Jameson III that a GPS signal was a liability, forcing the young demolitions expert to rely on rudimentary navigation, testing his adaptability. Jameson responded with a fierce, quiet determination, understanding that his technical prowess was now contingent upon blending into the background, a lesson learned from watching Christmas operate with almost supernatural stealth. Lee Christmas, in this setting, thrived on the tangible. He took charge of sourcing their new, untraceable supplies, moving through isolated communities with an unnerving blend of intimidating presence and careful diplomacy. He saw their situation as the ultimate test of professionalism, proving that even stripped bare of high-tech support, their core skill set, lethality and mutual reliance, remained superior. He had shed the shadow of proving himself. Now, he was the undisputed master of practical application, the cold logic applied when all else fails. Barney watched them, the weight of their collective future resting squarely on his shoulders. He saw that the fight against the system had, ironically, forged the strongest unit yet. They were no longer a collection of skilled individuals, but a single, cohesive organism dedicated to self-preservation and the protection of the truth Silven unleashed. The knowledge that their enemies were relentlessly hunting them added a sharp edge to their every movement. The quiet moments, the shared meager meals under a canopy of stars where the only light was carefully shielded, were charged with a deeper, unspoken camaraderie than any shared payday had ever fostered. They were no longer mercenaries. They were renegades, and the only currency that mattered now was trust, forged in the fire of betrayal and honed in the crucible of exile. The world had declared them expendable. They were determined to prove the world lethally wrong. The enforced exile in the oppressive, sprawling jungles served as a brutal proving ground, stripping away the last vestiges of their mercenary luxury and forcing a dependence on primal survival skills. Barney Ross, always the unflappable field commander, found himself relying on instinct that hadn't been fully engaged since his earliest Black Ops days, long before the glamour of high-stakes contracts. He observed his team adapting, each member shedding their specialized veneer to reveal the raw capability underneath. This life on the razor's edge was forging a new legend, one written not in mission statements, but in hidden trails and evasive maneuvers. Hail Caesar, surprisingly, found a meditative peace in the relentless physicality of maintaining their security perimeter. His imposing frame, usually associated with overwhelming firepower, became the silent, immovable anchor of their defenses. He moved with a surprising economy of effort through the dense undergrowth, his unwavering loyalty translating into an almost spiritual vigilance. When scouting parties from their former employers, small probing units testing the perimeter, were neutralized, Caesar's hand was always the final, definitive action, a clean, brutal punctuation mark on their warning. The dynamic between the young and old guards crystallized around the concept of knowledge transfer under duress. John Jonah Jameson III, having witnessed Caesar's terrifying effectiveness in silent defense, started approaching technical warfare with a new, almost reverent caution. He began building localized, self-contained communication jammers powered by salvaged geothermal sources, a testament to his adaptability. Yet he always deferred to Gunnar Jensen on the placement and trigger mechanisms, a tacit acknowledgement that digital foresight was useless without the means to enforce the digital silence physically. Jensen, in turn, found himself acting as a strategic advisor rather than just an ordnance specialist, his insights into enemy tactics deepened by his own history of feeling cornered and hunted. Lee Christmas, ever the purist, used the jungle environment to elevate his close-quarters expertise to an almost mythical level. He taught Denzel Washington how to use natural obstacles as deadly extensions of one's own body, transforming jungle vines and thickets into invisible tripwires. Christmas carried the quiet confidence of a man who knew that in a fight without backup, the reliability of one's own hands and blades was the only truth. He moved with the grace of a predator who understood every inch of his territory, a stark contrast to the hyper-modernized warfare they had just escaped. The emotional undercurrent was one of grim determination mixed with the profound satisfaction of self-determination. They were fugitives, yes, but they were their own fugitives. The shared danger had burned away any remaining professional distance. When Barney addressed them, not with orders, but with shared strategy, the response was immediate, absolute. They were fighting for the right to choose their own adversaries, a luxury few in their line of work ever attained. The jungle was their crucible, and out of it emerged a unit not just hardened by conflict, but bound by shared defiance against the machinery of the world they once served. They were waiting, coiled and invisible, for the moment to strike back at the system that tried to erase them. The Expendables 3 shifts the focus from a pure adrenaline shot of aging action stars reuniting to a more reflective exploration of legacy and generational conflict within the mercenary world. The narrative centers on Barney Ross, the perennial leader, whose history catches up with him in the form of Stonebanks, a former comrade left for dead years prior, now revealed as a ruthless arms dealer. This confrontation forces a significant tactical pivot for the team. Sylvester Stallone's Barney, channeling the rugged determination he brought to Rocky Balboa and the grizzled authority of Rambo, finds his unwavering principles tested. The introduction of Stonebanks, played by Mel Gibson, whose own career trajectory often mirrored a volatile mix of genius and unpredictability, serves as a perfect foil. Gibson's off-screen reputation for intensity is woven seamlessly into Stonebank's psychotic charisma, making the threat feel personal and existential, not merely procedural. The central dramatic conceit of the film revolves around Barney's decision to retire the older guard, Stallone implicitly acknowledging the physical limits inherent in casting legends like Harrison Ford and Wesley Snipes, and recruit a new, younger cohort. This transition is fraught with dramatic tension. Jason Statham's Lee Christmas, embodying the disciplined precision honed through decades of cinematic martial arts mastery, voices the loyalist concern. The original unit's cohesion is irreplaceable. The younger team, including Kellen Lutz's John Smiley and Glenn Powell's Thorne, represents the contemporary iteration of mercenary action, faster, perhaps more technically proficient, but lacking the shared history and scars that bind the original Expendables. This dichotomy mirrors the broader evolution of the action genre itself, moving from practical stunt work toward highly digitized spectacle. The film uses this generational gap to explore whether experience or raw, youthful vigor is the superior weapon. Chuck Norris's Booker, whose screen persona thrives on unwavering moral rectitude honed through his martial arts legacy and wholesome action roles, enters late but serves as a crucial moral compass, aiding the older team when the younger members falter due to overconfidence. Similarly, Antonio Banderas's Galgo, while providing necessary comic relief through his constant, enthusiastic chatter, subtly underscores the theme of necessity. He's a mercenary who simply needs a job, reflecting a different kind of dedication than the bond-forged loyalty of the core team. The action set pieces are expansive, benefiting from a larger budget, yet they occasionally suffer from the over-reliance on CGI that plagued many contemporary blockbusters, slightly dulling the visceral impact that defined the previous installments. However, the finale, which sees the older team re-engage after proving their worthiness to the younger recruits, offers a satisfying synthesis. It's a tacit agreement that while new talent arrives, the foundational strength lies in the established brotherhood, a narrative comfort blanket that audiences coming to see these icons expect and demand. The film ultimately reaffirms the bond, suggesting that true expendability is not physical retirement, but the severing of that essential connection. The emotional weight of Barney's decision to sideline his longtime comrades feels palpable, a necessary heartbreak for the sake of their survival. Stallone plays this internal conflict beautifully. You see the years of shared danger etched on his face as he watches Jet Li's Yin Yang and Terry Crews' Hail Caesar. Though Crews' role is minimized due to real-world scheduling constraints, the absence still speaks volumes about the fragility of this assembled family. Step aside. It's the reluctant father having to enforce a difficult curfew. Mel Gibson's Stonebanks is perhaps the film's most interesting variable. He isn't just an arms dealer. He's a phantom of Barney's past failures. The darkness Gibson brings to roles, whether it's the manic energy of Mad Max or the brooding intensity of his directorial efforts, imbues Stonebanks with a genuine sense of betrayal. He represents the road not taken, what happens when the mercenary instinct overrides the moral code, a fear Barney must confront head-on. The psychological warfare waged between them elevates the third act above simple bullet exchanges. The introduction of the younger crew, while intended to inject modern pacing, often highlights the very qualities the veterans possess in spades: experience navigating ambiguity. The youthful arrogance displayed by Smiley, in particular, serves as narrative shorthand for underestimating the enemy. He is sharp, capable of executing complex maneuvers learned in modern training facilities, yet he hasn't learned the essential lesson of the Expendables. Sometimes the best plan is to trust the guy who's been blowing things up since before you were born. Their initial failures against Stonebanks underscore the value of institutional memory. Arnold Schwarzenegger's trench, providing his signature, booming presence, operates as the external sounding board for Barney. His scenes, often involving witty, rapid-fire exchanges with Harrison Ford's cynical CIA operative Max Drummer, are brief but vital. Ford, bringing that familiar mix of world-weary sarcasm that made Han Solo so compelling and Indiana Jones so enduring, grounds the geopolitical maneuvering. Their chemistry confirms that sometimes the best therapy for a career spent in conflict is simply complaining about it with an equally scarred peer. The action choreography attempts to blend the vintage, heavy-hitting practical effects favored by Stallone's sensibilities with the faster, slightly cleaner aesthetics of contemporary cinema. When the older team eventually returns to the fray, their movements are slower, more deliberate, emphasizing impact over agility. This contrast is crucial. They are not trying to outrun the young guns. They are trying to outthink them, using terrain and tactical traps perfected over decades. A clear nod to the foundational work done by pioneers like Chuck Norris in shaping the modern martial arts film narrative. The film's ultimate victory isn't just defeating Stonebanks. It's the successful merging of these two eras, proving that the legacy is not just in the firepower, but in the shared knowledge passed down. The palpable camaraderie among the original cast members, often more evident in their knowing glances and unspoken exchanges than in lengthy dialogue, is the film's undeniable anchor. It's the audience's emotional dividend. When Dolph Lundgren's Gunnar Jensen reappears, slightly bewildered but fiercely loyal, it's a reminder that these men have faced down death so many times together that their shared history is almost a sixth sense on the battlefield. That history is what the younger recruits initially lack. They operate on training manuals, whereas the veterans operate on instinct forged in geopolitical firestorms from conflicts most audiences have forgotten. Antonio Banderas's Galgo, whose character claims to be a master of every weapon known to man, functions beautifully as the enthusiastic outsider, desperate to prove his worth within this elite circle. His chatter fills the silence where professional stoicism usually reigns, injecting a necessary lightness that prevents the film from becoming too bogged down in its own weighty themes of aging and betrayal. He embodies the pure, almost naive desire to belong to something legendary, a feeling that Stallone's Barney, burdened by leadership, can barely afford to indulge. The dynamic between Jason Statham's Lee Christmas and the new recruits is particularly telling. Christmas, always the disciplined second-in-command, represents the craft honed to perfection, the meticulous skill of the knife fighter and tactician. When he watches the younger team rely too heavily on drones and overwhelming firepower, his subtle disapproval speaks volumes about the diminishing value placed on individual, earned expertise in the modern military-industrial complex that Stonebanks represents. Stonebanks, the embodiment of corporate, efficient evil, is the product of that same modernization, having stripped away any pretense of camaraderie for pure profit. The climactic assault is engineered to showcase this necessary synthesis. The younger team handles the initial breaches, the modern, wide-scale penetration that requires speed and digital coordination. But when the confrontation becomes intimate, when the odds narrow, and the environment demands improvisation born of repeated failure, the veterans take the lead. This is where Stallone and his cohort shine, not by being physically faster, but by being tactically denser. Every move has a precedent. Every ambush has been planned against before. It's a testament to their longevity. They have lived through the evolution of warfare and can adapt to any iteration. The film suggests that while new tools are always arriving, the fundamental mechanics of violence and survival remain stubbornly analog, rooted in trust and shared experience. The final unified stand is less about defeating the villain and more about the older guard confirming, for their own peace of mind and for the benefit of their successors, that the code still holds. The most affecting emotional undercurrent in The Expendables 3 is the quiet acceptance of mortality threaded through the veterans' performances. Stallone's Barney isn't just fighting a former friend, he is fighting the specter of his own obsolescence. Watching the younger, faster replacements move with the effortless agility he once commanded forces a poignant moment of self-assessment. This emotional acknowledgement elevates the film beyond simple nostalgia. It becomes a commentary on how any peak performer, be it an action hero or a real-world operative, must eventually confront the ticking clock. Mel Gibson's portrayal of Stonebanks is crucially fueled by the actor's own kinetic screen energy, channeled here into pure malignancy. Stonebanks isn't merely a villain seeking money. He seems driven by a desire to prove that the mercenary life, devoid of loyalty, is the only honest path, a direct refutation of the brotherhood Barney has built. This personal stake amplifies the action, transforming set pieces into philosophical arguments. When Stonebanks speaks, there's an underlying menace that suggests he understands the core appeal of the Expendables, the bond, and seeks to dismantle it from within, which he initially achieves by fracturing Barney's trust in his own judgment regarding the old guard. The scenes featuring Harrison Ford's Max Drummer and Arnold Schwarzenegger's Trench are cinematic shorthand for the burden of command and the relief of temporary detachment. Ford, whose legacy is built on playing cynical men dragged back into reluctant heroism, brings a necessary dose of bureaucratic weariness. His interactions with Trench, who always approaches crises with a slightly amused fatalism honed by decades of surviving impossible situations, serve to externalize Barney's internal debate. Is this mission worth the inevitable cost? Their dialogue is a rapid-fire reminder that these legends built their careers on competence, not charm, though they possess plenty of both. The necessity of the generational overlap is ultimately the film's structural justification. The younger team handles the initial infiltration because modern threats require speed and digital camouflage, a domain where the veterans are comparatively slow. However, when the mission invariably degrades into close-quarters chaos, the value of the old hands becomes undeniable. Jet Li's character, though absent for much of the film, is often alluded to, representing the specific skill sets that cannot be easily replicated. The replacements, for all their vigor, haven't yet developed the scars that teach true caution. They learn their most valuable lessons not from training simulations, but from watching how Chuck Norris's Booker, a character who symbolizes almost mythological levels of personal skill and singular focus, operates when the chips are truly down. The film argues that the muscle memory of survival, accumulated over decades of cinematic combat, is the ultimate weapon, surpassing any piece of technology. The synthesis is the payoff, young legs running interference, while old minds orchestrate the decisive blow. The thematic resolution hinges on the successful reintegration of the original team, signaling a pivot back toward established strengths after the youthful exuberance proves insufficient. Barney's initial act of sidelining his friends, motivated by a paternal desire to shield them from harm, is revealed as a strategic error fueled by fear rather than foresight. The return of the veterans, particularly during the climactic sequence in the abandoned city, is orchestrated not as a desperate last resort, but as the deployment of superior, battle-tested expertise. It is here that the performances of the seasoned actors truly resonate, displaying an economy of motion that contrasts sharply with the younger recruits' more flamboyant, albeit less effective, acrobatics. Wesley Snipes' character, Dr. Death, whose introduction was heavily hyped and whose history with Barney promised deep personal conflict, finally emerges as a functional element, embodying the volatile genius of demolition and technical sabotage. Snipes, famous for his kinetic energy in roles like Blade, brings a manic, unpredictable edge that complements the steady calculation of Statham. His skills are vital in dismantling the advanced infrastructure Stonebanks employs, suggesting that specialized, almost arcane knowledge remains indispensable even in an age of networked warfare. His presence underscores that while brute force ages, specialized, idiosyncratic mastery often gains value through rarity. The atmosphere of the final battle eschews the clear-cut daylight engagements of the first film, favoring claustrophobic, dusty environments that favor stealth and misdirection, tactics favoring the seasoned Expendables. This shift visually reinforces the narrative message. The modern battlefield is messy, relying less on overwhelming aerial superiority and more on intimate, gritty infiltration. The younger generation provides the cover fire and the digital suppression, but it is the older guard, moving with the weight of their cinematic histories behind them, who execute the final disarmament. The unspoken dialogue between Stallone and Snipes, or between Statham and Lundgren, communicates volumes about shared sacrifice, a language impenetrable to the newcomers. This confirms that true expendability is not about age. It is about being disconnected from the core unit, a lesson Barney learns both the hard way and the right way by the film's conclusion, restoring the Brotherhood to its fully armed and functional status. The successful reunion of the core unit is powerfully underscored by the sheer visceral relief in the audience, which mirrors the emotional release felt by Barney Ross. When the aging mercenaries storm back into the fray, the camera lingers on their faces, not in admiration of their strength, which is expected, but in recognition of their shared, stubborn refusal to yield to time or treachery. Terry Crews hails Caesar, whose absence from the initial setup was felt as a structural gap, returns embodying immense physical power, channeled through absolute loyalty. His entrance serves as a visual metaphor for reinforcement, the anchor stabilizing the entire operation when youthful flexibility has proven insufficient against Stonebanks' calculated ruthlessness. Mel Gibson's Stonebanks, having successfully played on Barney's anxieties about leadership and loyalty, is finally cornered in a setting that demands close combat rather than grand explosions, his tactical mistake. This retreat into intimacy plays directly into the strengths of the veterans. Stonebanks anticipated facing the new, digitized threat, but he fundamentally misunderstood the enduring, almost archaic bond of the original team. His confrontation with Barney is less a physical fight and more a desperate attempt to sever the last thread of their shared past. Stallone ensures that every punch carries the weight of years of unspoken grievances and camaraderie, making the resolution feel earned through emotional endurance as much as physical might. Furthermore, the film subtly validates the careers of the supporting legends through their specialized contributions in the final act. Jean-Claude Van Damme's character, though not present, represents the kind of singular, almost untouchable martial artistry that the younger generation tries to emulate but cannot yet match. Here, the veterans fill those specific niches. Snipes handles the complex explosives that require intuitive understanding, while Norris acts as the near-mythical check on overwhelming odds. Their effectiveness is rooted in the sheer volume of cinematic experience they represent. They are playing the established patterns of action, cinema perfectly, whereas the young guns are still improvising. The final scene, where the team stands together, slightly battered but intact, is less about preparing for the next mission and more about affirming the present moment. The lingering shot on the faces, Stallone's weary satisfaction, Statham's quiet competence, Banderas's slightly manic grin now earned through shared peril, acts as a final cinematic promise. This iteration of the team, the synthesis of age and vigor, is the definitive one. The true enemy wasn't Stonebank's arsenal, but the internal doubt about whether the old magic could still conjure victory. The film's success lies in demonstrating that the magic is not in the gunpowder, but in the unbroken circle of men holding the line. The final moments of the film solidify the thesis that legacy in this mercenary world is not about physical prime, but about the unbreakable narrative of shared survival. Barney Ross, having navigated the near collapse of his team and confronted the ghost of his past in Stonebanks, settles into a role that is less field commander and more patriarch. His reconciliation with his older team members is handled with a quiet reverence. There are no grand apologies, only nods of understanding that convey the depth of the mistake and the immensity of the relief in having corrected it. This emotional shorthand is what the audience invests in, the realization that true leadership sometimes means admitting you need the very strength you tried to protect others from. Jason Statham's Lee Christmas, ever the pragmatic heart of the group, looks on with an expression that says, "I told you so," but tempered with genuine affection. His expertise with knives and close-quarters combat stands as a constant reminder that technology can be hacked, but innate skill honed through dedication remains sovereign. When the younger team members finally acknowledge the veteran's indispensable wisdom, it's not through formal praise, but through deferential positioning in the subsequent skirmishes. They yield the decisive tactical space. This silent recognition validates the entire arc of the film. Experience must be honored, not merely tolerated. Antonio Banderas's Galgo, having proven his mettle and secured his place, settles into the background noise with a contented sigh, his incessant talking now sounding less like nervous filler and more like the joyful chatter of a man who has finally found his tribe. He represents the successful integration of the outsider, the mercenary whose ego was secondary to his desire for belonging among legends. His story arc mirrors the audience's wish fulfillment, to be accepted into the inner sanctum of action cinema royalty. Even in the aftermath, the film avoids a saccharine ending. The scars remain visible, both literally on the characters and metaphorically in the wreckage. The victory over Stonebanks is not a complete cleansing. It's a hard-fought battle that underscores the perpetual nature of their conflict. Sylvester Stallone, in these closing frames, seems to carry a lighter burden, the weight lifted not by victory itself, but by the confirmation that the foundation, the brotherhood, remained solid under extreme duress. The concluding shot implies that retirement is a concept alien to these men. They simply regroup, lick their wounds, and wait for the next call that only they can answer, proving that their true cinematic longevity resides not in their individual franchises, but in their collective, enduring synergy. The enduring appeal of this ensemble, regardless of narrative missteps or budgetary shifts, rests entirely upon the shared, almost palpable history radiating from the screen whenever multiple original members occupy the frame together. It's a chemistry built on decades of cinematic competition and, finally, collaboration, creating an off-screen biography that informs every glance and shared maneuver. This synergy allows moments of levity, often driven by the timing of legends like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Harrison Ford, to land with significant emotional weight. Their banter is not just filler. It's the sound of old rivals finding common ground in the twilight of their careers, acknowledging the absurdity of their situation, while simultaneously reaffirming their mutual respect through sharp, practiced wit. Chuck Norris's brief but pivotal intervention serves as a moment of almost mythological intervention, injecting a level of pure, stylized martial prowess that even the younger, digitally enhanced recruits cannot replicate. Booker, in his quiet competence, operates outside the usual transactional mercenary framework. He is driven by an internal, unwavering code, acting as the moral pivot when Barney's judgment is clouded by personal vendetta against Stonebanks. This functions as a necessary reminder that skill divorced from principle can lead to the exact moral bankruptcy embodied by Stonebanks himself, solidifying the Expendables' identity as morally driven, albeit violent, protagonists. The evolution of the action sequences, transitioning from the grounded brutality of the first film to the more expansive, almost video game-like scale of this third installment, mirrors the professional challenges faced by the actors themselves. The veterans must adapt their iconic styles, Stallone's heavy, deliberate strikes, Statham's tight, precise knife work, to accommodate environments demanding rapid scene changes and extensive green screen work. Yet, the film's emotional peak is achieved when the action reverts to its simplest form, a hand-to-hand confrontation where technology and digital sheen fade, leaving only the physical grit and ingrained instinct. This validates the core appeal. The audience wants to see these specific iconic bodies, moving with the weight of their legendary pasts, prevail through sheer, stubborn will, proving that while styles change, the essence of the seasoned warrior remains constant and ultimately superior when facing a personal reckoning. The undercurrent of melancholy that permeates the veteran performances is perhaps the most surprising emotional texture of the film. It's the feeling of watching masters perform at a level slightly below their absolute peak, yet delivering performances imbued with a deeper understanding of stakes. Stallone's Barney carries the weariness of command, not just the physical exhaustion of fighting, but the psychic toll of continually betting his friends' lives. This emotional vulnerability, rarely explored in their previous action outings, grants the narrative a gravity that surpasses mere spectacle. When he entrusts the new team, there is a visible hesitation in his eyes, a flicker of fear that his judgment, the very core of his leadership, might fail them all. Mel Gibson's Stonebanks is brilliantly cast to exploit this fear. His performance is a study in unhinged clarity. He embodies the logical, albeit terrifying conclusion of a mercenary life lived without an ethical anchor. He doesn't just want to kill Barney. He wants to prove that Barney's entire edifice of loyalty is a delusion, a sentimental weakness waiting to be exploited. This antagonism becomes deeply personal because Stonebanks is a mirror reflecting the path Barney avoided years ago. Gibson's unpredictable intensity, honed across roles demanding both chaos and control, makes every exchange feel genuinely perilous, suggesting that the greatest threat to the Expendables is the erosion of their own internal moral compass. The younger members, while physically capable, serve largely as cautionary tales about expertise without context. Their reliance on coordination and digital intelligence falters precisely when the situation demands the kind of improvisation born from a lifetime of facing impossible odds with limited resources. Glenn Powell's Thorne and Kellen Lutz's Smiley are competent, but they lack the scars, both literal and narrative, that bind the originals. Their initial failures are crucial for narrative pacing, but they also serve to elevate the returning veterans. When the old guard sweeps back in, the difference is not speed, but density of experience. They move through the environment as if they helped design it, utilizing traps and blind spots that only decades of cinematic warfare could teach. The true heart of the film, however, remains in the brief, brilliant interactions between the established titans. Harrison Ford and Arnold Schwarzenegger trade barbs that feel less like scripted dialogue and more like the venting of two men who have witnessed the geopolitical absurdity of the last 40 years firsthand. Their cynicism acts as necessary ballast against the often overwrought personal drama of Barney and Stonebanks. They represent the strategic, observational layer of warfare, contrasting beautifully with the visceral, up-close fighting style of Statham and Lundgren. In essence, the film argues that effective action requires not just the raw power of youth, but the layered, accumulated wisdom of those who have already survived the genre's greatest hits. The final triumph is therefore not just eliminating the threat, but proving that the collective mythology they built remains the most potent force available. The triumphant synthesis of the old and new guard in the final act serves as a powerful meta-commentary on the state of the action genre itself. The film suggests that while technology and CGI offer spectacle, the enduring foundation, the core competency of practical, character-driven action, still wins the day. Sylvester Stallone, through Barney Ross, embodies this necessity of returning to basics. His satisfaction isn't derived from overwhelming firepower, but from successfully navigating the delicate act of mentorship while reaffirming his own leadership's bedrock, trust in his tested comrades. The slight stiffness in his movements is deliberately contrasted with the fluid, almost weightless agility of the younger actors, emphasizing that survival at this level is less about quickness and more about strategic placement and unwavering commitment to the plan. The subtle, yet crucial redemption of Wesley Snipes' Dr. Death is a payoff for the audience's anticipation. Snipes, whose career thrived on an unpredictable, almost acrobatic screen presence, brings a necessary element of controlled chaos. His expertise in unconventional weaponry and sabotage means he operates on a different frequency than the straightforward firepower utilized by the rest of the team. He's the specialist who solves the problem that brute force cannot touch, a narrative device validating the inclusion of highly particular skill sets that define the original Expendables ethos. Every member, however eccentric, is indispensable. Antonio Banderas's Galgo, the constant talker, serves as the audience surrogate who is both amazed and terrified by the sheer magnitude of the veteran's capabilities. His non-stop commentary highlights the veteran's profound unspoken communication. While Galgo narrates the action, the core team communicates through a shared visual language developed over years of life-or-death scenarios. This contrast underscores that true immersion in this elite brotherhood requires time and shared trauma, something the younger cohort can only aspire to through association. Harrison Ford's Max Drummer, with his inherent world weariness inherited from roles spanning decades of adventurous cynicism, anchors the geopolitical stakes. He doesn't fight in the trenches, but his presence validates the mission's importance through his official but skeptical lens. He represents the establishment acknowledging, grudgingly, that the only people capable of handling this level of extra-legal threat are the very people the establishment officially disavows. His reluctant sanctioning of the veterans' return is a nod to their legendary, almost mythic effectiveness outside established protocols. The film concludes not with a promise of perpetual youth, but with the affirmation that experience, when nurtured correctly, ensures continuity. The Expendables survive because they are willing to blend the new tools with the old, unshakable heart. The enduring emotional resonance of the Expendables 3 stems from its preoccupation with the concept of passing the torch without extinguishing the flame. Sylvester Stallone's portrayal of Barney Ross is laced with a deep, almost paternal anxiety, particularly concerning the immediate danger faced by his longtime associates. This is what fuels his initial, perhaps flawed, decision to seek out younger replacements. He is not merely managing a team, he is safeguarding an irreplaceable legacy of friendship and shared sacrifice. The implicit acknowledgement of physical limitations felt by the older stars, the recognition that a sequence demanding the pure acrobatic prowess of an earlier era is now a calculated risk, adds a layer of genuine stakes to the narrative that transcends simple plot mechanics. Mel Gibson's Stonebanks functions not just as a villain, but as a profound psychological mirror for Barney. Gibson leverages his own reputation for unpredictable intensity, channeling it into a character who embodies the successful pursuit of purely selfish mercenary ambition, unburdened by camaraderie or conscience. Stonebanks represents the seductive nihilism that Barney narrowly avoided. He is the path of least resistance taken to its most destructive end. Their confrontations are therefore imbued with philosophical weight. The battle is for the very soul of what it means to operate outside the law, loyalty versus absolute profit. The younger members, while necessary for modernizing the film's kinetic energy, primarily exist to highlight the irreplaceable value of institutional memory. Jason Statham's Lee Christmas, often the voice of grounded discipline, observes their initial, overconfident failures with the quiet disappointment of a master craftsman watching apprentices disrespect their tools. The young guns rely on data streams and synchronized maneuvers, whereas the veterans rely on subtle cues, shared history, and the deeply ingrained knowledge of an opponent's likely move, a knowledge Stonebanks himself helped create. This dynamic underscores a critical theme. Modern warfare might rely on technology, but ultimate survival hinges on human intuition forged by repeated near-death experiences. The brief but impactful appearances by the genre, Titans, Schwarzenegger, and Ford, serve as essential grounding elements. They are the wise, cynical elders, watching the next generation struggle to grasp the necessary gravitas of their calling. Ford's Max Drummer, radiating the weary authority of someone who has seen every political angle fail, brings the necessary skepticism to the CIA's involvement, subtly validating the Expendables' extra-legal necessity. Their scenes are potent because they offer a respite from the central conflict, allowing the audience a moment to appreciate the collective weight of cinematic history assembled in one room. When the older guard finally returns for the final confrontation, it is not a desperate comeback, but a calculated strategic reinforcement, proving that the synthesis achieved is not a compromise, but a force multiplier where youthful speed supports seasoned tactical precision. The ultimate catharsis of the film is achieved when the original team, having shed the pretense of being sidelined, re-enters the conflict with a palpable sense of mission reintegration. Their movements are not faster, but they possess an unmatched density. Every rotation, every block, every cover position is layered with decades of accrued combat data. Jet Li's yin-yang, whose absence initially signaled Barney's overcautious leadership, is replaced in the reunion by the sheer, unwavering kinetic power of Hail Caesar, whose return symbolizes the restoration of full team cohesion. Terry Crews embodies a force of nature held in check only by Barney's direct command. His sheer bulk becomes a tactical advantage used with surprising precision, unlike the younger team's more generalized aggression. The tactical brilliance of the final assault lies in its deliberate regression to fundamentals. While the new team handles the initial digital breach, the veterans dominate the close-quarters clearance, where communication is reduced to grunt signals and instinctual reaction. Dolph Lundgren's Gunnar Jensen, always the volatile expert, finds his niche in deploying volatile, area denial capabilities, his manic energy now channeled into focused destruction rather than drunken rambling. His loyalty, once questioned, becomes absolute proof of the Brotherhood's magnetic pull. He was always waiting for the callback to the only place he truly belonged. The thematic victory is not merely the elimination of Stonebanks, but the affirmation that specialized, hard-won expertise is non-transferable. Mel Gibson's villain is defeated not by superior firepower, but by superior understanding of the terrain and the psychology of their shared dark history. Barney doesn't just outfight him, he outknows him. This elevates the victory beyond a simple box-office confrontation. It becomes a statement that the golden age of action stars possesses an intrinsic value that training simulations can never replicate. The final image of the fully reassembled crew, scarred, pragmatic, and perfectly complementary, suggests a continuity where age dictates role specialization rather than obsolescence, confirming that true power lies in the mosaic of complementary veteran skills. The emotional weight carried by each returning veteran in that final unified push is immense, operating on multiple levels that the younger, unburdened recruits can only dimly perceive. For Dolph Lundgren's Gunnar Jensen, his re-entry is painted with an almost childlike eagerness, a fierce desire to prove that his loyalty never wavered, even when he was deemed expendable. When he cracks a sardonic smile after disarming a complex trap, a smile that barely touches his eyes, it speaks to the quiet trauma of being passed over, only to be called back when the clean, digital warfare proves insufficient against true human cunning. His loyalty is his penance and his salvation. Antonio Banderas' Galgo, having finally earned his stripes and silenced the internal noise of his self-doubt, drops the incessant chatter and operates with a focused intensity that is startling. His enthusiasm morphs from nervous energy into genuine earned confidence. He is no longer trying to fit in, he is in. When he expertly coordinates a flanking maneuver with Lee Christmas, their brief, sharp verbal exchanges confirm that Galgo has absorbed the ethos, less talking, more killing. This transformation from outsider to integral cog is deeply satisfying, rewarding the audience's patience with his initial bravado. The dynamic between Jason Statham's Christmas and the younger team, which had been fraught with paternal disapproval earlier, shifts into one of tacit respect. Christmas doesn't need to lecture them anymore. He simply demonstrates the elegance of necessary economy. His knife work in the tight confines of the collapsing structure is poetry in motion, swift, brutally efficient, and requiring no external power source. He moves through the chaos not as a frantic participant, but as a surgeon carving out the core infection. The younger recruits, witnessing this mastery up close, finally understand that their drones and overwhelming ammunition are merely tools. Christmas wields a part of himself. Finally, the quiet affirmation between Stallone and the veterans who returned, Lundgren, Statham, Cruise, is the film's true denouement. There are no elaborate speeches. A shared glance between Barney and Gunnar speaks of every hell they walked through together, acknowledging the momentary lapse in trust and the enduring reality of their bond. This unspoken dialogue transcends the immediate threat. It is the confirmation that the code they forged in fire remains the only unbreakable alliance in a world dominated by transactional betrayal, symbolized perfectly by Stonebanks. Their survival isn't just a win for the good guys. It's a victory for shared history over cynical modernization. The film's final visual statement, often achieved through the quiet tableau following the major explosions, is a meditation on the endurance of the scar tissue that binds these men. Barney Ross, standing amidst the wreckage with a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his hand, a residue of the physical toll he rarely allows to show, looks over his reformed team. This is not the triumphant roar of a young hero, but the satisfied exhaustion of a general who has successfully defended an ancient citadel against overwhelming siege. The relief etched onto Stallone's face suggests the burden of the narrative has been lifted. He has proven, both to himself and to his friends, that he can still lead them through the darkest shadows of their past. Harrison Ford's Max Drummer, observing the operation from a distance, perhaps via a secure satellite link or a dusty command outpost, offers a final, wry observation, likely captured in a tight close-up. His weary smile acknowledges that the chaos he tried to contain through bureaucracy has been neutralized by the very renegades he was supposed to oversee. Ford embodies the institutional acceptance that some problems simply require actors who live outside the rulebook, lending a necessary, reluctant legitimacy to the entire endeavor. His character validates the Expendables' existence by conceding that their methods, however unorthodox, remain the most reliable contingency plan. The quiet contrast between the original team members is crucial in these aftermath moments. While Statham's Lee Christmas might be methodically cleaning his array of blades, a meticulous ritual suggesting a need to impose order on chaos, Terry Crews' Hail Caesar simply leans against a piece of destroyed machinery, breathing deeply. Caesar's physicality dominates the frame, yet his stillness conveys absolute trust in the organizational structure Barney has restored. He is the immovable object, the human shield whose sheer presence reassures the others that the perimeter is secure. Even the peripheral characters gain depth in this final stage. The young mercenaries, humbled by their near-catastrophic failures, adopt a posture of silent deference. They no longer interrupt or challenge. They observe the rituals of the veterans, the sharing of a lukewarm canteen drink, the terse, coded directives about extraction routes. This absorption into the fold is the true success of the mission, proving that the team's legacy is not static but osmotic. It can be imparted to the worthy successors, provided they first recognize the superior value of accumulated wisdom over youthful zeal. The final shot lingers on the group's silhouette against a setting sun, not promising eternal youth, but confirming the enduring, necessary utility of men who know exactly how to look death in the eye and force it to blink first. Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to the Smiling Frame channel. Please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a thumbs up. Today, we are going to be discussing the movie The Expendables 3 from 2014. The relentless pursuit of justice, or perhaps just the lucrative business of high-stakes muscle for hire, finds the aging but still formidable Expendables facing a terrifying new reality. The opening salvo sees Barney Ross, ever the composed field general, leading his crew. Lee Christmas, the master of blades with a surprising depth of emotion beneath the tough exterior, and Gunnar Jensen, whose past demons often threatened to derail missions, now thankfully anchored on a raid in Somalia. They intercept a heavily armed convoy, demonstrating their familiar, if slightly slower, synergy. The target isn't just weapons. It's a notorious international arms dealer, Conrad Stonebanks, a figure who casts a long, dark shadow over Barney's history. The confrontation with Stonebanks, however, takes a shocking turn. Stonebanks, revealed not to be some washed-up mercenary, but a cunning, well-funded opponent, easily outmaneuvers them, leaving several Expendables severely wounded, and Barney himself clinging to life. This near-fatal encounter serves as a stark reminder that the game has evolved, and perhaps their analog methods are no longer sufficient against modern threats armed with superior resources. Back in the States, a recovering Barney, guided by the practical wisdom of CIA operative Max Drummer, realizes the mission cannot proceed with their current structure. Drummer subtly pushes Barney toward a difficult decision, retirement for the older guard. Barney, unwilling to sacrifice his friends but recognizing their vulnerability, takes the painful step of sidelining the original team. He sets out to recruit new blood, aiming for younger, faster, and perhaps more expendable operatives, a concept that initially feels alien to the brotherhood he has built, echoing the sense of duty that fueled Arnold Schwarzenegger's early action roles, now filtered through a lens of necessary pragmatism. The search leads Barney to Las Vegas, and then to various corners of the globe, gathering a crew whose profiles read like a who's who of burgeoning action cinema talent. There's the eager, skilled newcomer, John Jonah Jameson III, a wise-cracking explosives expert whose youthful enthusiasm contrasts sharply with the grizzled veterans. There's also the martial arts dynamo, Diesel Washington, whose fluid fighting style recalls the high-kicking choreography of his cinematic inspirations. This new generation, brimming with energy and digital know-how, represents the future, a necessary infusion of youth to face Stonebanks, who, it turns out, has ties to the very intelligence community Barney once served. The final confrontation is set in Bucharest, where Stonebanks has established a massive fortress, intent on flooding the global black market with weapons. The older team, unable to sit idly by, secretly reunites, driven by the fierce loyalty that defines their careers, the kind of loyalty often seen in classic war films where the bonds forged in battle prove stronger than any official mandate. Lee Christmas, never far from a sharp edge, is visibly energized by the prospect of settling the score personally. The combined force of the seasoned veterans and the fresh recruits launches a two-pronged assault. The younger team handles the initial infiltration, showcasing their agility and technological proficiency, disabling perimeter defenses, and causing significant chaos within the enemy ranks. Meanwhile, Barney, Sylvester Stallone's enduring archetype of the grizzled warrior, alongside his core team, breaches the main compound. The ensuing battle is a chaotic ballet of gunfire, expertly thrown knives, and well-placed explosions, reminiscent of the best practical effects-driven action sequences. The climax focuses squarely on Barney and Stonebanks. Their history, a partnership that soured into betrayal, provides the emotional weight to the physical fight. Stonebanks, arrogant in his belief of technological superiority, is ultimately outmaneuvered by Barney's street smarts and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. Stonebanks is defeated not just by a bullet, but by the cumulative weight of his own greed and betrayal, a classic trope where pure, principled force triumphs over corrupt ambition. With Stonebanks neutralized and the threat averted, the film concludes with a satisfying sense of closure. The two generations of Expendables stand together, having proven that while methods change, the core values of dedication and brotherhood remain the essential components of survival, leading to a final, earned moment of camaraderie, and perhaps a hint that the next generation is ready to take the reins when the call comes again. The initial ambush in Somalia, designed to be a swift extraction and neutralization, quickly devolved into a demonstration of Stonebanks' chilling foresight. When Barney Ross, whose screen presence has always been defined by that quiet, unwavering command, felt the impact that nearly ended him, it wasn't just a physical wound. It was a deep psychological blow to the man who built his reputation on reading and controlling the battlefield. Watching his foundational team, like Lee Christmas, whose dedication to his throwing knives borders on performance art, struggle against overwhelming, unseen firepower, truly shook the foundation. Christmas, whose earlier roles often involved proving his worth in the shadow of bigger personalities, clearly carried the burden of nearly failing his leader. Barney's forced hiatus brought forth a necessary but painful introspection. His decision to sideline the originals, Gunnar Jensen, whose redemption arc has always been about channeling his explosive temper into precision, and the others, was not born of cowardice, but of a devastating understanding of operational reality. He recognized that their familiar rhythm, the one that defined their legendary successes in countless past missions, was now outpaced. This act mirrors the necessary succession seen in classic adventure narratives, where the old mentor must step back to ensure the legacy survives, even if the process feels like self-amputation. The recruitment phase, particularly in Las Vegas, offered a vibrant contrast. John Jonah Jameson III, with his sharp wit and mastery over explosives, a nod to the practical demolition skills often highlighted in Stallone's earlier portrayals of lone operators, brought an almost reckless energy. He was the embodiment of digital age capability, meeting old-school bravado. Denzel Washington, whose fighting style suggested a deep, almost academic study of various martial disciplines, represented the specialized physical expertise modern threats demanded. They weren't just filling slots, they were injecting a necessary evolutionary spark into the stagnant formula. When the older guard, fueled by stubborn pride and the unbreakable pact of their shared history, decided to defy Barney's orders and join the final push, the emotional resonance was palpable. It was the ultimate declaration that their identity was not defined by a paycheck or a mission brief, but by their commitment to each other. This is where the heart of the Expendables truly lies, in the shared, almost familial defiance against isolation, much like the sense of brotherhood celebrated in films about soldiers behind enemy lines. The final assault on Stonebank's Romanian stronghold was a masterclass in layered strategy. The younger team served as the perfect disruptive element, utilizing speed and technological sophistication to chew through the outer defenses, mirroring the precision strikes demanded in contemporary counterterrorism cinema. Then came the main event. Barney, leading his battered but resolute veterans, Lee Christmas, whose blades found their mark with brutal efficiency, and the others, to the core. The confrontation with Stonebanks was intensely personal. Stonebanks, the mirror image of what Barney could have become had he succumbed to pure avarice, represented the failure of trust. The physical struggle between them was less a fight between two soldiers, and more the necessary exorcism of a shared, corrupted past. When Barney finally prevailed, it wasn't just a tactical victory. It was the triumph of hard-earned experience and enduring loyalty over cold, calculated betrayal. The final scene, with the integration of the two generations, suggested a future where the grit of the past is successfully married to the agility of the present, ensuring the legend, however dangerous, will continue. The near-fatal encounter in Somalia was not merely a tactical failure. It exposed a vulnerability. Barney Ross, whose entire career was built on anticipating every enemy move, had perhaps ignored the erosion of time and the hyper-modernization of warfare. When Stonebanks effortlessly turned the tables, the shock radiated through the team. Lee Christmas, whose meticulous focus on his bladed weapons often masked a deep emotional sensitivity, likely felt the sting of incompetence keenly, that familiar pressure to be the perfect support asset when the primary structure crumbled. Gunnar Jensen, whose journey has always been about maintaining a fragile peace with his own destructive tendencies, would have seen in Stonebanks the ultimate chaos he struggles to contain within himself, making the defeat feel existential. Barney's subsequent move to sideline his original crew was portrayed with the heavy weight of a leader forced to choose the lesser